why I set it up as estate plan, and you probably should too. This video is not going to be like those other boring estate planning videos that you've watched. Rather, I'm just going to tell you my story, because my story involves a lot of things that people like to learn about. What happens to my kids if something happens to me? What happens to my business ownership if something happens to me? What happens to all my money if something happens to me? Well, I have all three of those things. So I'm just going to share with you what I did to protect myself. And the biggest way that I'm able to protect myself is through estate planning. So if you enjoy videos about people sharing real life stories about themselves or their own experience in their lives, you're probably going to enjoy this video, and you're going to be enjoying other videos that I'm going to be creating. So how can you support the channel? Subscribe to it. We're going to be putting out more and more content just like this. So why did I create an estate plan? Well, it's really helpful to get some context, some background. Let's rewind the clock all the way back to 2015. 2015, I bought my first very expensive piece of jewelry called a wedding ring or an engagement ring. I ended up getting married in 2016, and over the course of the last decade, I've had 3 kids. After the second kid that I had, I thought probably need to make sure that I'm protecting where these kids are going to go if something happens to me or my wife. How are they going to get supported? Where are they going to get the money to pay for school, to pay for groceries? All these different things that after the first kid, I hadn't really thought about. But after the second kid, I thought I really need to have these conversations. What I went ahead and did is talk to an estate planning attorney. I went into his office, brought my wife with me. She was not enthused about having to go to this meeting, but I drug her along with me, and I think she was really glad that she went after we started peeling back the onion. And what was really interesting is, as we went into that estate planning meeting, the estate planning attorney had asked me to fill out this really long questionnaire document. I dreaded filling it out, but I did it anyway. I put all of my assets on there, taxable accounts, 401ks, IRAs, Roth IRAs, business ownerships, kids that I had, life insurance policies, an entire inventory of everything that I owned in my life and all the important people that I helped take care of. And as I walked into that estate planning attorney's office and he started to peel back the onion, he started to ask questions about our assets, our kids, I started to realize there were a lot of intricacies and complexities that I had not thought about from an estate planning perspective. The most important one to me was what happens to my kids. And being that that was the most important thing to me, I addressed that right away in that conversation. And the estate planning attorney explained it in very simple terms. If something happens to me and my wife, a judge gets to decide where my kids go. And I thought, wow, I do not want that to be the plan. So I asked him, how do I make sure that that's not the plan and I get to decide? And he said, well, Luke, that is the first of a few documents that we're going to create for you. One that we call a pour-over will. And in that pour-over will or living will, what it allows us to do is it allows us to outline who those guardians of your kids are going to be. And I said, wow, that's great. Where do I sign the paperwork? And he said, before you sign up to become a client, let's walk through the rest of your assets. The great thing about that living will or pour-over will is that we were able to list a ton of detail around where our kids were going to go. We were able to list individual people. In our case, we wanted to make sure that the family they were going to, the husband and wife were still married in order for the kids to go there. If they weren't married, they were going to go to the next family that was listed underneath. It was really important for us to make sure that where our kids were going, the husband and wife were still married. And that's an important element because a judge is not going to be able to take into account that that's important to you after you passed away. So that pour-over will was really important, which brought us to the next part of the conversation. He looked at the outline of all the inventory of assets that we put together and he said, wow, you guys have a lot of non-tangible personal property on here. And I said, what does that mean? And he said, oh, it's really simple. It's any asset that you own that doesn't have a title. Some things that we were thinking about there were pieces of art. We were thinking about wedding rings, jewelry, things of that nature, where there's not necessarily a title, but I still want to decide where they were going to go. And he said, have no fear. Even though they don't have a title, you can decide where they're going to go. And it's going to go in that pour-over will, where we're going to pour those non-tangible personal assets into your trust. And you're going to be able to specifically say, I want my wedding ring to go to my daughter. I want this baseball card to go to my son. All those different things that are important to you today, you can list those out in that document. But again, what happens if you don't do this? The government gets to decide. And I told the estate planning attorney, well, I definitely don't want the government to decide. So again, where do I sign? And he said, no, Luke, you don't get to sign up yet. We got to continue down the path and make sure that you understand all the things that we're going to be doing for you. I said, all right, well, where do we go from here? And he told me, well, let's look at some of these other assets that you own. And at the time, I had a business ownership. I had different investments in taxable accounts. I had a 401k, IRAs, and Roth IRAs. And he said, Luke, I want to explain to you what happens if something happens to you today with these assets that you own. I said, perfect, explain it to me. And he starts outlining to me what that probate process is going to look like. And in the probate process, it's the government's process for deciding where assets are going to go. It's a public hearing. They list it out in the paper. They say, here are all the assets that the Turner family owns. Does the Turner family owe any debts to anybody? So anybody can come and say, well, Luke owes me $50,000. Luke owes me $100,000. This bank says I owe them $1 million. And anybody can come and say, Luke was going to give me X, Y, and Z, or Luke owes me X, Y, and Z. And I wanted to avoid that process, right? Like I want this to be smooth, clean, and I want to avoid the government's process at all costs. And the great news is I'm able to do that by setting up a revocable living trust. But the estate planning attorney outlined to me the biggest mistake that he sees people make. They get these fancy trust documents drawn up, and what ends up happening is they don't title the assets in the name of the trust. So your action item today is that if you have a trust set up, make sure that all your assets are titled in it. Taxable accounts, homes, business ownerships, things of that nature. So I got that revocable living trust set up, and I started to ask more questions. Said to the estate planning attorney, well, if I have millions of dollars and they go to my kids, how do I make sure that my kids don't blow it? And he said, well, I get asked that question a lot. And the great thing about a revocable living trust is that we don't have to give the assets outright to the children. And so in my case, what I did is I said that my kids have to be 30 years old. They have to not be on drugs and a couple other stipulations to make sure that they could actually get those assets. Once they get the assets, they can do whatever they want with them. But if I were to pass away before they're the age of 30, I put what I would call training wheels on the assets, meaning that they're going to have a trustee on those assets that help make financial decisions for them. Something that's really important to be thinking about if you have a substantial amount of assets. You don't want your kids to get all this money dumped on them at one time. Or at least for me, I didn't want that to be the case. So as we continue this conversation, we're sitting in the estate planning attorney's office. I'm starting to think, wow, I'm really glad I came here because there were all these different things that I didn't even know about. And then he asked me one of the biggest questions, which was, well, Luke, do you know what's going to happen to your business if something happens to you? And I thought, well, no, I have an LLC set up. It's taxed as an S Corp. I'm not planning on dying, but what does happen? And he said, well, this is one of the biggest problems that happens because you have a partner in your business. And if you were to pass away right now, how do you guys decide on the valuation? How does that get paid out? And I said, oh, that's a really great question. I don't know. And he brought up this idea of buy-sell insurance and making sure that we have a buy-sell document drafted. And for us, this was something that was really important because for me and my business partner happens to be my brother. I don't want to be in business with his wife, and he doesn't want to be in business with my wife. And so one of the things that we were able to do is get buy-sell insurance put in place that allows the business ownership to smoothly transition to the other partner if there's a situation that I were to pass away or my business partner or brother were to pass away. So that was one of the biggest things that we were also able to solve for in the estate planning process. Now, as you're thinking about this, it could be a little bit overwhelming. So what I've gone ahead and done for you is not only can you rewatch this video, but in the description below, I put together a blog that I wrote on the estate planning process that you can read through, you can save it down, you can come back to it later. Because the reality is, whether you're just starting out in your financial journey, you just got married, you just had your first kid, or you're worth tens of millions of dollars and you are well down your financial road or financial path, estate planning is one of the most important things that you need to be thinking about. So that wraps up today's video. Again, if you enjoy hearing from people that have real life experiences with money, please subscribe to the channel below. That's how you can support this video. Appreciate it.